Thank you for joining Monitor Deloitte's Transform, Rinse, Repeat LinkedIn Live event. To navigate what's next in an uncertain environment, executives need bold strategies and transformation programs that fuel growth. With a 30-year history of helping businesses grow, Monitor Deloitte is your ally in shaping and operationalizing business change. We don't stop at strategy. We go the full distance. As trusted collaborators, we work closely through the entire process, from idea to execution, to help you drive end-to-end transformation, continuously optimize business models, and create lasting business value. We combine industry insights with corporate technology and transformation strategy capabilities to embed durable impact and advantage. With that, I will turn it over to your moderator for today to lead us through a discussion of organizational transformation.
Hi, welcome to Transform, Rinse, Repeat. My name is Kristi Lamar. I'm a managing director in our strategy practice at Deloitte. And I'm very honored to get to spend the day with all of you today, as well as our two panelists. I'm honored to be joined by Maya Leibman. She's the CIO of American Airlines. I've admired her from afar and close up for a couple of years, and I'm really excited to listen to her tell her stories about how American has changed over the last couple of years. And I'll let her give a more detailed introduction. I'm also joined by Rich Nanda, who's the leader of our strategy and analytics practice here at Deloitte, and also an esteemed author on transformation as well. He recently published a book that is on the bestseller list. So Maya, I'll hand it over to you quickly to give an introduction, and then on to Rich.
Well, I think you covered it mostly, Kristi. I'm the CIO for American Airlines. I've worked at American for 27 or 8 years at this point. And I've done a lot of different roles, including stuff in the revenue management department. I was the president of the Advantage program, but I've been doing this job leading the technology organization for about the past 10 years.
Awesome. And if you must have started when you were 5, if you've been there.
Exactly. You got it. That's it.
All right. How about you, Rich? Want to give us an introduction?
Yeah, sure thing, Kristi, and thanks, Maya, for joining us. So I'm Rich Nanda. I'm 21 years here at Deloitte, and always worked at the intersection of helping companies grow, adopt and deploy technology into their organization to support that growth. And we've been doing this Transform, Rinse, Repeat executive discussion series for about 18 to 24 months now. We had a short hiatus, so it's great to be back, and it's great to have Maya here as our guest to talk about all the ways that American and the entire airline sector has been on this journey of transformation. And then, of course, the last couple of years have been uniquely interesting from that standpoint as well.
Love it. So I would like to remind you all that this is an interactive discussion. Please use the chat function to ask questions for Rich or Maya or even myself. But I'll kick it off with a question that I always think is fascinating. It's probably top of mind, Maya, considering, I've flown this week and didn't have a mask. So COVID continues to change things. But certainly the airline industry took a hit when COVID hit. Lots of disruption, lots of different, traffic was impacted, the customer experience was impacted in just a matter of days. And this inherently created, hopefully space and time and capacity for your team to drive change. But it also necessitated really quick pivots, right, in a matter of 1 and 2 days and beyond, to support really the passengers, your organization. I'd love to know, how did you and your team embrace all of this change? How have you institutionalized it and identified opportunities and really embraced this acute transformation and made it part of your DNA?
Well, that's a big question. And I'll start just by sort of painting the picture a little bit of what, March of 2020 looked like. It was crazy. Like literally overnight, we lost 90% of our revenue, 90% of our customers. And in some areas, even more than that. And we had to put hundreds of aircraft on the ground. And I can assure you that there's no system at this airline, no process for managing aircraft when they're on the ground, because that's, not what they're supposed to be doing. But you're right. This gave us an opportunity just to be super rapid in our decision making, like where should we fly and what should our fleet look like? How do we keep people safe? How do we adhere to these new government regulations that would come out, at like 5 o'clock on a Saturday and have to be implemented by 9 a.m. on a Sunday? And, all of our priorities, everything that we had been working on was sort of out the window. Like before, we were working on mobile technology, for example, to bring our gate agents, out from behind the counters that they work behind, to work directly with be directly with our customers. And now instead we were like manufacturing our own plexiglass shields to keep us further separated from our customers. It was completely the opposite, and whoever thought that like a touchless kiosk, one you could check in with, would ever be a thing, but that was like one of our top priorities. So it was a stressful time, but intellectually, it was like a really interesting experience because there was no playbook. And we worked very differently. We really focused on getting stuff done, getting it out versus getting it perfect. And that was good for us.
So do you have a playbook? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you keep going.
So, you said you didn't have a playbook. So have you created a playbook? Like, what does your team look and feel like today, and how do they operate that's different than now 2.5 years ago?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think we really one of the lessons we really learned was, look, we liked a lot of these new ways of working, like rapid decision making and just getting something out and valuing like who could do it, grabbing that person, rather than sort of worrying about like a whole hierarchy. Well, that manager needs to come to the meeting and their manager needs to come to the meeting and stuff like that. And so we wanted to ensure that we retained a lot of these same practices. And to a certain extent, I'd say we've sort of, in some ways, sort of gone back to what was business as usual, where it works. And in other ways, I think we've fundamentally changed.
I love it. So, this was quick, right? And I think we always used to talk about transformation as being this, like, let's just start, and we have this big strategy to that. And Rich, I mentioned early on, you recently wrote a book on this. And I'd love to kind of get your thoughts around, the fact that transformation just doesn't have this discrete starting point nor end point. And how are enterprises evolving their approach? And Maya, I'd love to hear from you, like to know that this is an ongoing, perpetual way of living, that we, our blood pressure maybe went really high, but now we've come back down and we continue to disrupt ourselves and transform incrementally on a daily and more sustainable basis.
Well, I can certainly start. I think we learned a lot over the 2020 and 2021 period about how companies absorb disruption and change and then grow from it. And when Maya, you were talking about a couple of those examples and the fact that there wasn't a playbook, but I think certain companies, and what you described, Maya, certainly fits this. There was some muscle memory about how to react to disruption, and there's some leadership intuition about how to use disruption as a vector for positive change and growth. And of course, there's some significant urgency during the pandemic that created a very heightened sense of change, and it was all happening when there was a tragic human toll around us. So I don't want to minimize the pandemic disruption. But I also think we have to give companies credit for, their ability to absorb change on an ongoing basis. And so the book that we wrote, The Transformation Myth, it studied what companies did over the pandemic period, and it tried to draw some lessons about, well, what did we get right? And why did we get those things right? And one of the things we did get right was companies that had this growth mindset that said, look, transformation is just a way of adapting, innovating, and growing to a set of changes that are out there and will continue to be out there. Well, those were the ones that were, just well prepared, from a leadership and a mindset standpoint, as well as a business process and system standpoint. So to me, that's a really big lesson here, is that yes, there will be more significant acute disruptions, hopefully no more pandemics, but things that are significantly disruptive to the business environment. But the more likely thing is we have these chronic disruptions that overlap with each other. And we're living through it now with geopolitical environment that creates supply chain challenges and inflationary challenges and labor challenges. And so being able to have a transformation muscle to absorb and grow from those things, that's going to be a key corporate capability going forward.
Right.
Yeah, I love that, that concept of the growth mindset. A lot of times people come to me in technology, who work in my organization and say, oh my God, there's so much change. And I'm like, well, what did you expect? You selected a career in technology. And so growth mindset is absolutely important. For us, I think there were like 3 things that we had done that really helped us, really laid the foundation for us to get through this and be able to transform and adapt. The first is, we'd really invested in this idea of a product model. So really organizing ourselves around our business capabilities rather than, oh, here's a project we have to do. Let's bring a bunch of people together and do the project. And then when it's over, they disband. And so we organized around these capabilities like, the gate and boarding process, or check baggage, or crew management. These are all capabilities that we have. And so we put people around that. We allowed them to be really self-empowered, self-contained teams with business and technology leaders. And, they were empowered to do what they needed to make their product awesome. So they developed their backlog. They selected items off their backlog based on the value that they provided. And they had the resources and the budget to basically pivot when they needed to based on what the last iteration told us. So the product model was super helpful just in terms of how we were organized. The second was really focusing on automation, and especially around the developer experience. You really cannot transform if your developers are hampered by the process associated with developing. So we have developed this experience that we call Runway. It's based on some open source technology from Spotify called Backstage. And basically this simplifies and standardizes and enforces compliance for how we move to the cloud. And it's all around automation and just removing that friction from the development and deployment process. And the third thing was data. I mean, you hear it at any technology conference that you go to, or, it's so important. And one of the things that we really focused on during the pandemic and took this opportunity was to make data more self-service, because, it's okay if we have it all, but if people can't get at it, if people can't contribute their own data to it, and if people can't derive actionable insights from it, then it's not useful. So we've still got a lot of work to do around sort of this product and automation and data, but those were the things that I think really helped us in our transformation.
I love it. So I'm going to put both of you on the spot a little bit and ask you, so Rich, you talked to a lot of clients. Maya, you guys went through a lot of change, continue to go through change. Change is imperfect, right? And I have to imagine that there were maybe some missteps that you've witnessed or participated in. How do organizations recover from that? Because you're working with other parts of your business that are suddenly maybe potentially lacking in confidence, right? So even though they might have a growth mindset, they're like, oh, geez, like we didn't get it right. Can we continue to do this? So how do you overcome from those challenges and those missteps? And what have you learned from it?
Yeah, I mean, nothing goes perfectly, and, we shouldn't expect it to. The idea of the growth mindset and around, these concepts around experimentation is that things will fail. I mean, they have to. You can't, I love this quote from Edison, and I don't know if he really said it, but this idea that, I didn't fail. I just found 1,000 ways that a light bulb doesn't work. And, if that's what experimentation is about. And I think what the problem that we have when we say something fails is that we give no value to learning. And if that is your mindset, if you don't believe that there is any value associated with learning, that the organization doesn't get better and stronger and use that experience to make better decisions in the future, then of course you're going to, consider it a failure, and there's going to be a lack of trust and some of those characteristics that you mentioned. But I believe that there is a lot of value in learning.
Yeah, I would agree fully, and I think the the top leadership, right, has to believe and make that true, right? That in an environment where we're innovating and experimenting, failures are accepted as a gift, right, to continue to feed innovation. And so just tactically, leaders have to find ways to celebrate those failures as learning, point to when the successes do happen, point to those failures as key milestones or steps in the in the journey, and then cross-functional teams, all the things that Maya described earlier about having a product-centered model, automating key development processes, data, that self-service. I mean, none of those things are strictly the domain of the CIO and her team, right? So that needs a lot of cross-functional teaming and partnering. And so not only does it have to be top-down, this acceptance of failure, but teams have to have a lot of patience and grace in how they're going to work together and have some ups and downs. And I think, again, the companies that have thrived through all this disruption are proving it every day that those simple behavior and cultural changes go a very long way to create sustainable capacity for change.
Yeah. So I want to pull a little bit on the thread, and you kind of planted a seed with the Edison example. But, I have to imagine that all of this change and opportunity has also evolved your thinking on kind of design thinking strategy and really the user experience. You mentioned suddenly you have like this contactless check-in that is, not like now we live and breathe it. It's kind of funny how quickly we adapt, right? But, how has your thinking changed on, user experience? How's the architecture of that? And like in the solutions that you're really creating for your users and your businesses, and you have to partner in new ways.
Yeah, look, I think design thinking is critical. And it's something that I'll admit, we haven't gotten right yet. A lot of it, like you mentioned, architecture, a lot of it starts with the architecture, but over a long period of time, different systems get created at different periods of time. And so they just naturally have a different underlying, fundamentals, different architectures. So for example, we had the self-service machines at the airport, those kiosks, and then we had AA.com, and then we had the mobile app. Well, a lot of those, those do a lot of the same things, like, checking in for a flight or changing your seat assignment or paying for a bag. But they do it in very different ways because they just grew up with underlying different architectures. And that's problematic. So then you have to go back and do that really hard work of refactoring so that you're creating services. You're essentially extracting the least common denominator out of these applications so that everyone can use it, so that you can essentially build it once, make, an enhancement one place and have all the different form factors be able to consume that. But that's not easy. And we haven't cracked the nut on that. But we do have this amazing team of professional user experience designers, and they obsess over the customer journey. What they did during the pandemic, which I think is great because we don't have enough of these people, is they really taught these design thinking practices, to our development teams so that we could grow our own skill and mindset and scale this ability when we think sort of customer first as we design and build these shared services and these applications. So now we have hundreds of team members trained in design thinking approaches and lots of additional trainers who help us to scale. But I think the last thing that we've done in this space that I'm excited about is, it's super easy to think about design thinking when you think about AA.com or the mobile app or things that our customers are using. And of course, that's really important because it's just how much volume, how many people are interacting with these tools. But what we haven't traditionally done a great job at is design thinking for the team member experience. Like our flight attendants have a handheld tablet, what should that look like? Or our gate agents use a lot of systems today, and we need to get better at creating value through design thinking around our enterprise tools just as much as our customer facing tools.
Yeah. So on the kind of notion around talent, right? We talked about that a little bit, and this is a question that came in from the chat. So, what strategies have you seen or used to motivate your people into learning, more, right? And engaging, especially with this confluence of sometimes there's so much routine that they're just not motivated to do it. At the same time, they're just so busy that it's hard to carve it out. So how do you make it a priority so that they engage and they invest?
Yeah, that's not an easy thing to do. We, I think generally technology attracts people who are lifelong learners because, like I said, you chose a career in technology. You can't expect it not to change really significantly, really quickly. And so generally, I find that it's a team of people motivated to learn and to get better. Something new comes out and everybody kind of wants to get up to speed. But the biggest barrier is what you said, which is who's got the time? I mean, we're all running 1,000,000 miles an hour and we've got 1,000,000 things to do. And so as leaders, we have to be really intentional about carving out that time for our teams. And I'll say, sometimes we do it really well when we create learning journeys for people and we work with them and we say, you're here today, we need you to get here, and here are the resources that we're going to give you, and here's the time that we're going to give you and the space to make that happen. And sometimes we don't do as good a job at that. But the only way to make that happen is for the leader to be very intentional about ensuring that that time and space is available, because learning is hard and it takes time and energy and effort.
Yeah.
Hey Maya, I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to be asking all the questions, but I wanted to connect that with something you said earlier about some of the multidisciplinary and cross-functional teams, the designers working with the developers. How is that teaming getting organized? Was that an intentional choice between you and some peers in the executive team? Was it more entrepreneurial by the teams finding ways to connect?
In adopting this product model, what we did was sort of create what we call the ideal product team. And we identified the resources that should be part of that team. And while I'd love to have a designer, a UX person on every single one of our product teams, we don't have enough. And so we've got, that expertise that sort of bounces among various products. But between our developers, our engineers, our designers, our product owners, that represent, we'll call it the business for lack of a better term, we are bringing them together and saying, your job isn't to, develop the touchless kiosk. Your job is to ensure that the check-in experience is awesome. And you need to determine what it is what work creates that value to make that product awesome.
Yeah.
I love it.
I would just validate that that's a super scarce resource. And even when we're doing our client work, having enough of the experienced designers embedded with the developers is always a challenge, but the results are also always better when you can.
Yeah, no, our folks can point to, really simple things like, A/B testing on AA.com and moving buttons, to different places, or coloring buttons different, or shaping them different, just something as simple as that. You can see we're talking about, a couple percentage point differences in where people click and how well they make it through a process, and how, where they get stuck and how much revenue they generate. And that's, those percentage points, when you're doing, tens of millions of dollars of sales on this website, it adds up very quickly. So there's a huge value in it.
Right. So again, on the topic of talent a little bit, we're all living through this very complicated technology talent time, frankly, just talent in general, right? But I think especially around technology. And Rich, I kind of start with you. You lead a massive practice, right? And you both lead massive organizations of technologists. What are you seeing as unique approaches to attract, build? We talked about, creating new learning capabilities and journeys around that, as well as retain talent, especially in these high capabilities like design thinking, UI, AI, like pick it. How are people solving for it?
Yeah, I think one of the big learnings of the last 2 years with the virtualization of work, as many good things as come from that, from productivity and some of the work-life benefits, is it's become a little transactional, right? Teams have become a little more transactional. The employee-employer relationship has become more transactional. And so what's critically important, and I think highly valued, is when, you know, things like development are connected to culture and belonging. And the team experience is additive, you know, in a unique way to an employee's, you know, feeling of delivering value. And so how do we build in a more hybrid work, which for sure is here to stay, and it's good that it's here to stay, but in a hybrid in-person and virtual work arrangement, how do we build that sense of belonging that becomes a difference maker for people when they're thinking about you know, job with company A versus company B? And for us, it's absolutely been, you know, very tricky in the last 2 years. And I've seen it in clients as well. And so I think, you know, very high on a lot of companies' to-do lists right now is reestablishing that sense of belonging, interpersonal connection as a difference maker to where people, you know, want to work and spend their professional times.
Yeah, I probably couldn't have said it any better. You know, I feel like, you know, and this gets into what Rich was talking about around this idea of remote and hybrid work. I believe that the greater distance you have from the people that you interact with on a daily basis as part of doing your job, the more transactional your experience becomes with your company. And you need, you know, I believe strongly that there's some amount of human connection that is required. And a lot of that happens face to face. And without that, I think I think work suffers. I think people suffer. And I think people ultimately make different decisions about their careers. You know, the thing is, if you think back on the best moment in your career, it was likely that it was characterized by you had some really interesting challenge to solve, you had the resources to solve it, and you had a great group of people to solve it with. And, you know, that's sort of the secret sauce for ensuring that you can attract and retain, you know, high impact players.
Yeah. You know, it's funny, as you were saying that, I was like, well, I'm not sure I'll ever say one of my top 10 moments was staring at my laptop and at a Zoom, as much as I'm enjoying this conversation.
And I'm totally with you.
Visualizing one of those moments where we cracked a really tough problem and got some great feedback from a client. You know, we were running down the hallway, high-fiving everybody. And, you know, you just,
those are the moments you remember.
Mm-hmm.
But there's, you know, there's beauty in the way that we work now, right? In terms of, you know, hybrid work. And frankly, it creates more opportunity for us to, I think, attract kind of a more diverse population, right? Because we can be more inclusive, we can be more aware of people's well-being and their personal needs. And it also hopefully gives us an opportunity to create paths for more diverse professionals within our organizations, right? And so Maya, you've been a very vocal proponent, and I shouldn't even say proponent, like you live it, like how do we create more diverse, equitable, and inclusive work environments? And that with the complication of like, we have so much demand for need, like how do you balance the need and the desire to have a diverse workforce, yet you've got so much work that you've got to get done. And you're, you know, I think America's got to be an attractive place to work, but you're also in Dallas where there's a lot of technology needs, right? So how do you live through that, and how do your teams live through that?
Yeah, I don't think, you know, getting work done and becoming a more inclusive and equitable place are necessarily at odds with each other. I think that you can, you know, I think all the research will point to more diverse teams make everybody better. And I've been reading some interesting social science studies that are really fascinating about how that happens. But I won't go into that. I will just say that, you know, we at American and my organization, we've been really intentional about how we get to, you know, how we move along this journey and ultimately sort of where we want to get. And some of it is around something as simple as, metrics. And, I hate to say that what gets measured gets done, but in a lot of cases it does. And so if we want this level of representation, or if we want this amount of retention, let's be clear about where we're headed. And, let's put something at risk. This year we're going to put diversity targets into our STI. And so I think that's terrific. I think we need to be open about the biases that we have and really take that journey to identify them and do what we can to remove them. So, for example, we've developed a diverse hiring panel to help us as we promote people into leadership positions. How do we remove that bias from hiring? Another area is, how do we create opportunities? Sometimes it's just a matter of connecting people and allowing people to build their professional network and to get advice about career navigation and something as simple as resume writing and interviewing skills. And so we're working hard on, creating those kinds of opportunities. So those are just, a few of the things that we're doing to as we progress along this journey.
Yeah.
I love the I'm sorry. I love the statement that those two things aren't at odds. I do think the one thing that it will take more effort to change the trajectory of where corporate America is trending in terms of equity, and the activities that you were describing. Those take time to conceive. They take time for leaders to drive into the organization. And so I do think we have to be prepared, to allocate our leadership time and personal time differently, right? Go find new schools to recruit from, create the right development programs. So, if they're at odds, it's only in that there's no, that will require change and investment to get to different outcomes. But those things are all worth our time, because once we do it, then we get higher performing teams. So the ROI on it's going to pay tenfold when we get there.
Yeah. The thing I would say is that while it is an investment, the people, who are leading these efforts, around some of the things I just mentioned, like creating these opportunities and, setting up these diverse hiring, panels, they're loving it and they are really engaged and energized. And, it's an investment that already pays dividends, because people get a lot of just intrinsic value from it personally.
Yeah. And maybe just coming it back to the beginning, it's all part of the growth mindset too.
Exactly.
Like, it makes you a better, more innovative, more adaptable organization. So why wouldn't you do it?
Right. And it's not a zero-sum game, right? Like, the reality is there is so much opportunity. Why can't it's the pivots and the shifts? And Maya, I think you're being really humble. One of the things that I love that American is doing is partnering with organizations that are looking at, honestly, like young women that are seniors in high school, and giving them access to teams and talent and capabilities that they would probably have to wait till longer in their schooling or careers to get that exposure. So it's just thinking differently, right?
Yeah, this program is like such a win-win-win. We have a partnership with the Dallas Independent School District that does this early college program where students are selected when they're freshmen. They go through 4 years of high school, and in the course of that, take a deeper course load, including the last couple of years of high school. They take their courses at the local community college, and by the time they graduate, they have both their high school diploma and their associate's degree, their 2-year community college degree. And American is then there's a third party like an American who sponsors a school. And for us, our students are going through deeper technology track around software development and PC support, stuff that's important to us, but other companies are doing things around hospitality or nursing. And so for us, we started this 5 years ago. Last year, the cohort of freshmen that started as freshmen just graduated, and we hired them, this last fall. We've got like 11 of these, basically 18-year-olds, who are working at American Airlines. And, I think you're right. And half of them are women, because that's how we selected students for the program. It's 50-50, and it's 100% Hispanic. And just based on where the school is that we sponsor. And, it's really impactful to these people, to their families, to their communities, to the city, to American Airlines.
Yeah, I love it.
Kristi, I would be remiss if I didn't give you a shout out for all your leadership on women in technology at Deloitte. So making a big difference. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. I think, honestly, there's so much more to come on the conversation around women in STEM as a collective. And I look forward to partnering with both of you on that, and look for more to come from both of us. I have a great question for you, Maya, from the chat that I want to ask. And it's almost like the converse of how we started out the discussion, which is, COVID hit and 90% of your travel was gone. And now we're heading, like if spring break was any sort of indication in terms of how eager people are to travel, as well as the airport yesterday, wow, like there's lots of demand. But that inherently starts to induce risk into your organization as well. So how are you planning for what summer looks like, and knowing that the FAA just said no, or, we're not wearing masks anymore. Like every day is different, but now you've got all this demand that the trains have to keep running, but things keep changing.
Yeah, that's not any different than the airline industry every day. And that's actually, I think, why a lot of people work in this industry, because it is so fascinating and it is so dynamic and changing. We start preparing for the summer back in the fall of the year prior. And while it was hard to prepare this year because we didn't know, this past fall was like the Omicron was starting, and, who knew what demand was going to be like. But summer is our peak time, and we are always focused on improving the resiliency of our systems, not just IT systems, but our processes overall, and ensuring that everything is prepared and that we are getting, we target to have new functionality in place by March, April timeframe, so that it has time to bake in and we can utilize it. We've developed some pretty cool new technology to help us manage an irregular operation. So when there's a weather event, how do we slow down the airline a little bit and create more delays so that we can minimize the number of canceled flights? Because when loads are this high, when you cancel, there really aren't any protect options for our customers. And so that's a terrible experience for everyone, including our crew members. And so, let's use some pretty sophisticated, we've invested in all this data. How do we turn that into information so that we can make the customer experience better?
I love it. So we have a great question, it's a great add-on to that in the chat, that was, you talked about even early on, like making data more accessible to all of your users, right? How have you evaluated the use of like IT AI to really not only make the data much more accessible, but even that much more relevant?
Yeah. Today we're having a data and analytics summit, which is this internal conference that we have a group called Operations Research and Decision Support, who I think that's what they're called, who put on this conference essentially. And I kicked it off this morning, and it's like a whole group of data geeks that just want to sit and talk about data and all the things that we're doing with data all day. And it's really awesome. We're doing some really cool stuff with AI. It's one of those things that, you talked earlier about, things can go wrong. You can do it wrong. And so we're still experimenting. But there were some breakout sessions at this conference talking about specifically some, pretty cool machine learning algorithms that we've put in place to better predict where the FAA is going to direct a flight to land at one of our airports, for example, at DFW, so that we can then minimize the amount of taxi time. We can gate that aircraft on the side of the airfield where it's most likely to land, which reduces taxi time. It reduces fuel consumption. It reduces congestion in the alleyways. It reduces contention for that gate. Like we can create more space between flights at a given gate. So, some really cool use cases that we're talking about using AI, now that we have that data foundation to really solve interesting business problems.
I love it. Rich, you must see a ton of great examples that what our clients are experimenting and using data and AI to do really phenomenal things, right? Like anything you can share?
Well, first, I love the idea of a data and analytics summit. I think that's a pretty innovative way to, bring the all the right people together and create some excitement and momentum behind it.
Can let me just jump in real quick. I was kicking it off and I said, I had this clip that I wanted to show from Star Trek. I said, how many of you are fans of Star Trek? And several raised their hand. I said, look, you're in a room full of data geeks. If there isn't a safer place to admit that you like Star Trek, I don't know where that is. So anyhow, sorry, Rich, go on.
I love it. Well, I love Star Trek, so maybe I'll get an invite next year. I think I'll just cue on two things that Maya said, because I do think those are some really good practices that I'm observing at other clients. So one is data foundations are super important, right? And so that's all about making sure that the data is getting curated to where it needs to be. And, that means parsing the data and organizing it. And there's, oftentimes that's not the most exciting part of this, but it's so necessary to have a data foundation, that you can build from. And then it's being kind of opportunity back, right? Thinking about what are the pain points in the organization or with our customers that we need to we need unique and innovative ways to solve for, and then bringing those multidisciplinary teams together to ask a lot of what if questions, because those opportunities and challenges, they're opportunities and challenges for a reason. What the things we've done to today haven't been able to close the gaps, and so you need that design thinking, you need that what if mentality, and when you apply that to a data foundation that's ready to go, interesting things can happen and start to create value.
Yeah. So we don't have a ton of time left, but I have to brag on you one more time, Maya, if you don't mind. For our audience that may not know that you were the Dallas Super Global CIO of the Year, I think it's phenomenal that you got celebrated and recognized for the great work that you're doing. And you mentioned in your video how proud you are to see that technology continues to make such a large impact at American. And how do you ensure that technology always has like that primary seat at the table, right? We've unpacked a little bit of it, but I can't imagine in your short 26 years that it's always been the way, but you've really paved the way within American. Like, how did you work across the organization, and how do you continue to do that to ensure that technology is always, and data, at the forefront of these conversations?
Honestly, I haven't had to work too hard, I think, because look, there is virtually nothing that happens at this airline on a daily basis that doesn't involve technology in some way. And so we demonstrate the value that technology brings every day. And if it's not obvious when things are working well, it's super obvious when the tech isn't working, because things fall apart really quickly. So I think that by and large, everyone really recognizes the value. So I don't have to work too hard to have a seat at the table. I hate the idea of technology working hard to have the seat at the table and I hate this idea of business, this is the business and this is technology. I mean, we don't say that with any other group. It's not like finance in the business or marketing in the business. So I don't, technology is as much a part of the business as any other organization. And in our highest performing teams, you'd be hard pressed to know sort of who reports up to me and who reports up to one of my colleagues. And that's important. One of the things, though, that we have to do is we have to be clear about how we're measuring our value. We've developed these objectives and key results, and this provides a pretty obvious scorecard for the company that can see, okay, this is how we're doing on improving our on-time arrival rate, or reducing our mishandled bags, or improving the number of minutes of downtime of our systems. And so I think those are helpful in terms of ensuring that technology always has a seat at the table.
Yeah. And you've mentioned kind of scorecards and metrics throughout the course of the conversation, right? Even about DEI. None of the metrics have been around uptime and availability and things like that. It has been an evolution to have a conversation to talk about the impact and the value that technology is bringing to the collective business in their terms. And I love it. So
yeah, one of the things we talk a lot about is inputs, outputs, and outcomes. So the output is, yeah, we've reduced the minutes of downtime, but the outcome is we're making more money, or we're improving the customer experience. And that's what's important.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Maya. Thank you, Rich. It's been a very fast 45 minutes. I'm very grateful that we got to spend some time with you today, even though it's in the Zoom space. I thank everyone for joining. Please continue the conversation on LinkedIn. So much more to come. And I think Rich is going to maybe talk about the next session.
I'll just wrap it up here, Kristi. Thank you for hosting, Maya. Thanks for joining. We'll be back in May. So stay tuned to our LinkedIn activity, and we'll share registration soon.
Awesome.
Take care.
Thank you guys both. Really.